I'm sure most of you know by now that Glenn Greenwald, legendary reporter and co-founder of The Intercept, left The Intercept about 2 or 3 weeks ago over there were multiple clashes between Glenn and The Intercept leading up to this, but the straw that broke the camel's back was when Glenn tried to publish a story or an article related to the new information around the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Burisma corruption scandal. So even though Glenn Greenwald was a co-founder of The Intercept, and had contractual right, it was written into his contract that he does not need the approval of any editor to publish anything that he wants at The Intercept. That's written in his contract, but still he was overridden by an editor at The Intercept who said he cannot publish this article about this Hunter Biden and Joe Biden corruption scandal. He cannot publish the article unless he took all of that stuff out of it. So he's like, okay, fuck this. I don't need this. And then he left. And for those of you in my audience who might not know who Glenn Greenwald is, like I said, legendary journalist and reporter, one of the best alive in the field. I've been following him for a very long time. And he's one of the few people I've been following since I really got involved in politics who has not completely shit the bed. And he got started under the Bush administration, publishing his own writings about the war on terror and U.S. imperialism and the illegal war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the torture network and all this stuff. So he was one of the fiercest critics of the Bush administration. And that's how he first started writing about politics. Then the crash in 2008, he talked a lot about. He became a regular columnist at The Guardian. Then he broke one of the biggest stories of our lifetime, one of the biggest stories of the generation, the Edward Snowden NSA leaks, where Edward Snowden, who was the NSA or CIA contractor, basically had released the biggest batch of leaked government documents that exposed the mass surveillance programs that the government was using to spy on everybody in the United States and really everybody around the world. It was definitely the biggest story of the year and still one of the big stories of our lifetime. After that, he went and co-founded The Intercept with Laura Poitras and Jeremy Scahill, where he's continued to do great work. One of his most recent huge stories was he exposed the giant corruption scandal in Brazil, where they basically, the Justice Department made up bullshit charges to lock up Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, so that the right-wing authoritarian opposition in Brazil can run in the election and win, because they weren't going to win against Lula da Silva. So huge story, massive story that he broke in Brazil regarding the corruption. So I say all of these things. I go through some of Glenn Greenwald's history because it's very relevant to this conversation, since a lot of this revolves around some nobody rando editor at The Intercept trying to override Glenn Greenwald and act like he knows the field of journalism better than Glenn, and he can tell Glenn what he can publish and what he can't publish at his own outlet. Which brings me to the point of this video. Cenk Uygur and the Kasparian, the Young Turks, they did a pretty long segment about this story, and it was published on their channel over a week ago now. And it was there was so many bizarre takes in this, and I was just confused by this. And so through different parts of this interview, Cenk basically compares Glenn Greenwald to a smear merchant for writing this article. He also basically flat out calls Glenn a liar. And he says that Glenn Greenwald, this is Cenk Uygur we're talking about. Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks says that Glenn Greenwald is obsessed with Russia and he cannot see straight. I mean, the amount of projection and delusion in that statement alone is just hard to wrap your mind around. So there's a lot to talk about. I have a couple of clips from this discussion that Cenk and Anna had on their show, and I'm gonna break it down. But first, you guys already know the deal. I'd like to make this my main thing. But the show needs to be sustainable. So if you guys can help contribute to the show, I have a link to my Patreon in the About page of my YouTube channel. I also have a link to PayPal account if you feel more comfortable doing a one-time contribution. And I'm also doing this partnership with this company called Mask Up, where I have a special link that's, you guessed it, in the About page of my YouTube channel. If you click the link and you make a purchase, I get 20% commission. So they sell reusable cloth masks for about $17, and like I said, if you make the purchase, I get 20% commission, and it costs you nothing extra. Now, back to this story. So this comes to one of the most bizarre parts of this entire video for me, where Cenk accuses Glenn of being so obsessed with Russia that is blinding his view of reality. Again, it's just incredibly delusional, projection out the ass. But here's the clip, and I'll come back and break it down.
This story, he's far too sure about things that he doesn't have enough evidence about, in my opinion. He says that the fact that the documents regarding Hunter Biden cannot be verified is blatantly false. I don't think it's blatantly false at all. Now, it's an interesting debate whether you could consider them verified or not verified. But just because somebody testified that Hunter Biden actually gave it in and said, "Oh, I'm blind, but he gave it to me." By the way, that guy changed the story in the first place. And now that trusting his second story, I don't see how that makes it perfectly verified. Somebody else involved in that transaction also said that email existed. Yeah, that guy's a giant Trump supporter, and who was trying to do even in his own account, do a disreputable deal with China. So I wouldn't say the story's not at all verified, but I certainly wouldn't say the story's verified. And I wouldn't want a giant story going, "Oh my God, what a huge earthquake here in this election." And honestly, Glenn is obsessed with Russia. And I've said that to his face, and if he comes on, I'll say it again to his face. So he goes on a tangent about how people are saying that this might be a Russian operation. You want to criticize that? I'm with you. I don't see any reason why this is a Russian operation. And so you've got to present evidence, and they haven't presented evidence of that. So if you wanted to make that point, that's not that controversial point at all, right? But then to turn around and make it seem like this is a giant land-breaking story right before the election, well, it misses the context so much that I fear that it becomes purposely misleading. So I'll give you an example, and it's the same one we've been talking about here, but in a different context, the Alex Morse case. So Alex Morse is a progressive candidate in Massachusetts. He's running against a terrible corporate Democrat. He was in the primary. And right before the election, a story got leaked about how Alex Morse was hitting on students at colleges, right? Alex happens to be gay, and so there was a little bit of a homophobic strain to that accusation as well. But the main accusation was, can you believe he's doing this, etc. And they have messages where he doesn't hit on them, but he says, "How are you? It was good to see you at the student event," or whatever it was. We read you the messages earlier, they're perfectly benign. Now, you could run a story saying, Alex Morse sends messages to students right before his election, and go, what? I thought they were verified. He did send messages. But wait a minute, that misleads your audience into thinking it's a giant scandal on par with what his opponent has done. And that's not remotely the case. At least within the story, you have to give it the outside context that gives you a sense of whether the story is important, whether it might be misleading, or it's something to look out for, but hasn't really fully developed yet. And I didn't get that sense from his story at all. I thought the editors were right to throw up a couple of red flags and say, Glenn, I think you should be careful with this.
I love that you mentioned.
So first there, he tries to make it seem like Glenn is obsessed with Russia for bringing it up. But that's actually a big part of this story, because all the mainstream media outlets, well, a lot of the mainstream media outlets, they will run as soon as this Hunter Biden email story came out of the New York Post. The first thing they did, they tried to deny the veracity. They had no evidence to claim that it was false, so that wasn't really true. And then they wasted no time in saying, "Oh, this clearly must be another Russian disinformation campaign," just like they did it to Hillary Clinton in 2016. That was from the day the New York Post story was published. That became an accepted theory of this entire story that was pushed by mainstream media journalists. So, and then it continued, and it's up into where some people at the Intercept also said that it was a Russian disinformation campaign. So when Glenn brings that up, it's not like, oh, he's so obsessed with Russia and he can't stop talking about it. No, you guys are obsessed with Russia and you guys can't stop talking about it. And everything that makes it Democrats look bad, the default position is that it's Russian disinformation. So it is very relevant that Glenn brings that up in his criticisms of the way the media covered this entire story. And the fact that Cenk doesn't see that is just, I think it's because he was one of the people pushing Russiagate, obsessed with Russia. So he doesn't see the damage that it is causing to discourse, because he's one of the people who believe it, that Russian disinformation around every corner. Then he says that Glenn is basically misleading people on purpose, basically calling Glenn Greenwald a liar. And then to his example for, or the evidence, or the example he provides to explain why he thinks Glenn Greenwald is a liar, is to compare what he did in trying to publish this story to what a smear merchant did when they did an organized, intentional smear campaign against Alex Morse in his primary. Wow. How do you even come up with such a comparison? What Glenn Greenwald did was, there was this story, these emails came out, and it contradicts everything that Joe Biden's been saying about how he has nothing to do with his son's personal business, and he's not using his position as a government official to enrich his family. We have emails that completely contradict that. And so, yes, that is an important story, because, again, this man's going to be the most powerful person on the planet. So even if it's before the election, if it's 2 weeks before the election, if it's a week before the election, if it's a day before election, it's an important story, and Glenn Greenwald wanted to talk about it. So that's what Glenn Greenwald was doing here. And for you to compare that to, like I said, smear merchants who did an organized, intentional hit job on somebody who was running against a corrupt politician, and say, oh, both of you guys made incendiary claims without evidence before an election, and that's why Glenn Greenwald is a liar. I mean, wow. And then he says that in the Alex Morse story, that they had messages from Alex Morse to some of the students that he was talking to or whatever. They were completely benign, but still they ran with this story and made it salacious. And it was, again, like I said, an intentional smear campaign. How on earth is that what Glenn Greenwald did? Like I said, these emails show that they're influence peddling, that they're using Biden's official capacity as vice president of the United States to make money and to get rich. Hey, talk to your dad and meet with your dad so we could come up with some ways, and let's have a meeting. We come up with some ways where he can use his position to increase business or help Burisma out with whatever. That's damning. That's pretty fucking damning. That's not like, oh, see, it's not like an email to Hunt from an executive at Burisma to Hunter Biden saying, hey, great work you did on that PowerPoint. No, that's not the same thing. So, I mean, that is jarring. And you want to talk about, oh, I have no other explanation than he's just trying to be misleading on purpose. I kind of have to say the same thing about you right there, Cenk. My only takeaway is you're being misleading on purpose. I don't know where you get off trying to act like those are two same things. One is damning emails, kind of pointing out, detailing the corruption, and more importantly, completely contradicting everything that Joe Biden has said about this issue up to this point. That is newsworthy. Benign text messages and emails that Alex Moore sent is not newsworthy. So like this is, I'm going into a lot of detail explaining this. I don't know why, because it's clear to anybody on his face that you can't compare those two things. So I don't even know what Cenk was trying to do there. And again, so he says he's trying to straw man what Glenn Greenwald wrote, and making it seem like he came out and said, oh, I have the evidence, slap the handcuffs on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden right now. I have the evidence that should be taken to court that proves this corrupt deal. That's not what Glenn Greenwald said at all. The editor, what his problem with this is that he was raising questions that he did not have evidence to support. So like I said, what Glenn Greenwald was doing was asking questions like journalists do, pointing out a shady arrangement, some corrupt dealings that are going on, and saying, I don't have all the evidence, but this does raise questions about Joe Biden's motives. That's really what Glenn Greenwald was saying. Joe Biden might be, this raises questions about if Joe Biden's corrupt or not. That's not a definitive claim. And then Cenk says, I agree with the editors, quote, throwing up some red flags and saying, be careful here. Again, what's with all of the euphemisms and like, just say it how it is. Nobody threw up red flags and said, be careful here, Glenn. They said, you're not allowed to publish. We're going to go against your contractual right, the right that is written into your contract that you get to publish whatever you want without the approval of an editor. We're going to go against that and say you can't publish it. That is completely different than throwing up red flags and saying, hey, be careful here. What they did was go out of their way to violate a constitution, to violate a contract, and say you can't publish this. That is censorship. So let's just say it how it is. So Glenn says that the claim that the emails can't be verified is false. Not only do you have all the different pieces of circumstantial evidence and all the information that we know about the story prior, and then now you have one of the people in the email chain testifying, yes, these emails are real. Okay, that's a big step towards verification. And then you also have, like I said, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, still to this day have not said those emails are false. And again, somebody's accusing you of corruption and you know it's completely bullshit, completely made up. You would say that's just false. They haven't said that. They've danced around it and given incoherent answers and said Russian disinformation and all that shit. They have not said those emails aren't true. So, and then also the claim that it came from Hunter Biden's own laptop. So all these different things are ways you can put it together and verify whether or not these emails are true, or at least the very least the information in these emails are true, that they were trading on Biden's position as vice president to make a bunch of money. That there's enough there that you can verify this by asking the right people, finding the original documents and all those things. So it is the claim that's being made that, oh, you can't verify these emails is just false. People don't want to do it. Journalists haven't wanted to do it. And so they haven't done it. They haven't dug into the story. They haven't really tried to verify it. So the claim that it can't be is false. And then Cenk tries to discredit Hunter Biden's business associate by saying, oh, he changed his story and we don't know if he's telling the truth or not. He's a Trump supporter and all that stuff. Look at, like I said, look at the double standard that they have. Because when it was Michael Cohen who was lying for Trump and was the bag man for Trump's fixer and all that stuff, but when he just finally turned on Trump, oh, it was a completely different tune. Oh, Trump's a criminal. Trump's a bad guy. All this stuff. He lied on his taxes. He's and all this stuff. So when Michael Cohen testifies the complete opposite of what he's been saying for years, oh, now everybody wants to believe it. Now it's completely verified. The story's true. All the mainstream media outlets treated it like it's true. It was gospel as soon as Michael Cohen said bad, Trump bad, which is what they wanted to hear all along. Oh, now this verifies everything we know because he was there working with Trump. Cenk Uygur had the same thing. Oh, he was there working with Trump. So now he's saying that Trump's bad. Oh, Trump must be bad. But now that it's Hunter Biden, this guy's kind of sketchy. And should we really believe him because he didn't say that before? But now that he's testifying the exact opposite, can't really believe him. And again, you can raise legitimate questions about this guy. But it's not, like I said, it's not just his word alone. There is also all these different pieces of corroborating evidence that backs up what he's saying is true. So there's that. All right, so this next clip is Cenk addressing the accusation from Glenn that the Intercept is turning into just a propaganda outlet for the Democratic Party. And they've become incredibly partisan over the last few years. So here's a clip. It's about a minute long. I'm going to come back and break it down.
Going along with the mainstream in Washington is absurd. They've done the best reporting on progressive candidates and establishment Democratic candidates in the country. I would say, honestly, bar none. And Alex Morse is just one of the examples. They just broke stories about Don Bacon, who's in a race with Cara Eastman and his corruption. He broke a story in both in the Pam Keith race and the Mike Siegel race. I mean, especially the Washington Bureau led by Ryan Grimm. And here I'll be clear, Ryan Grimm also is a TYT contributor. And Glenn also complimented Ryan even in his piece criticizing the Intercept.
All right, so in that clip, I think Cenk just kind of exposed his own narrow-mindedness. So Glenn's accusation is that the Intercept has become incredibly partisan over the last few years. And they do go along with a lot of what the mainstream narrative is in the Democratic Party. And it's not to say that they haven't done anything, said anything critical about the Democratic Party. Like Cenk even admits right there. Glenn gives credit to Ryan Grimm for his reporting on like Tara Reid or on the Alex Morse story, where it was basically a Democratic Party did a smear campaign against somebody who's trying to run against an incumbent Democrat. So Glenn was never saying, "Oh, the Intercept is they only do news releases that are approved by the DNC." He never said that. But what he is saying is they're trying to fit into the culture of the Democratic Party and go along with a lot of their narratives. And the examples that Cenk gives right there, like I said, show his narrow-mindedness, because everything his only perception of this is, oh, do they say anything critical about corporate Democrats and do they say good things about progressives? Oh, so that must mean they're not partisan if they say some good things about progressive. That's not the point that we're making. The point is that they go along with the Democratic Party. And broadly speaking, yes, that's true. What was Russiagate? The Intercept was a huge pushing Russiagate. Basically everybody there was pushing Russiagate with the exception of maybe Glenn Greenwald and maybe a few other people. But Russiagate was widely accepted in the outlet. And again, that's not a small thing. It was years and years pushing this evidence-free conspiracy theory that the president of the United States is somehow an operative of a foreign government. He got the Russian government stole the election and installed Donald Trump. That was the narrative behind Russiagate. And it was completely unproven. It was completely false. And they ran with it nonstop, pedal to the metal for 3 years straight. That's a big deal. And yes, that is a partisan issue, because who was pushing that narrative? It was the corporate Democrats. And did they have any evidence? Absolutely not. But that didn't stop the Intercept from having to fit in with all the other news outlets and running with this partisan narrative. So that's part of what Glenn Greenwald was criticizing there. And also, when it comes to their take on the election, how many voices at the Intercept were saying, wow, that both these candidates are insanely corrupt and it's an indictment of our entire system? No. A lot of the Intercept was pushing this vote blue no matter who, and Joe Biden, we got to vote for Joe Biden, lesser of two evils, and all that shit. Most of the people, it was common thought at the Intercept, from the editors, even Jeremy Scahill, to the journalists and reporters, it was, they just widely went along with that. So again, that's partisan. They didn't have. It's hard for me to point any voices outside of that narrative that they had at the Intercept, except for, of course, Glenn Greenwald, who were actually incredibly critical of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And then, again, to the point about this being partisan censorship and the direction of the Intercept being incredibly partisan, look at the completely separate standards they have for reporting on or writing pieces about Joe Biden's corruption versus the standards they have about talking about Donald Trump's corruption or any Trump bad story in general. Like I said, Russiagate completely evidence-free, and they pushed it at that outlet for 3 years straight, 4 years straight, and they didn't have any evidence, ran with stories that turned out to be completely false, just like everybody else in mainstream media. So when it was anything that's Trump bad, oh, we don't need any evidence, and we will make definitive claims, and we will go as far as saying that the President of the United States was installed by a foreign power who rigged the election to put in one of their assets in charge of the entire government. You did not have any evidence for that. You didn't need any evidence for that when you ran all those Russiagate stories for years. But look at how the suddenly they've turned on a dime, and now even if you're not making definitive claims about Hunter Biden, even though you're not saying that this proves he's corrupt and lock him up right now, even though you're just bringing up the appearance of corruption here, and that it seems that something shady is going on. You don't have enough evidence to say that. So you take it out of your story completely, or you're not allowed to run a story at the Intercept. Wow, funny how that works. This really was, like I said, it's just a bizarre take from Cenk Uygur, because he has everything almost exactly backwards. And like, he must be like either the dumbest person on the planet, or he's just being obtuse on purpose. And he just looks ridiculous here. So this is very long, but I've watched this video, and the original video on TYT is about 20 minutes long. I've watched it maybe 3 times now, and I was just so floored by so many different parts of it. I was like, fuck, I can't just pick like one part of this or 2 parts. So that's why there's so many different clips here that I wanted to address, because it was just so bonkers. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section, because maybe it's just me, but this was a very weird take on this story.